Martinik, and I didn't know if Stuart would be here, but he's via Zoom, so I don't know. And Scott's obviously there, so just Kurt, right? Nancy. Kurt. Okay. Sure. Okay, Commissioner Lindquist.
Here.
Commissioner Spillman.
Here.
Commissioner Whittington.
Here.
Commissioner Edwards. Here. Alternate Bailey. Alternate Flanagan. And Chair Martinik are all absent. Do have a quorum though, should we need.
Good. I'd like to make a small revision to tonight's agenda. You should have a copy of an email from Stuart in front of you. You guys on Zoom, Scott, I'm not sure if you'll have one.
Let me try to, I can try to share my screen. Give me a sec.
You can share the screen or you can just forward it and stuff.
I didn't think about that.
Everybody else. Just some talking point ideas I'm looking at in the business. If that's okay.
No objections? Under new business,
Under new business, please.
can we move it to A?
Okay. Can I get a motion for the approval of the August 8th minutes, please?
Could we first maybe, excuse me, approve the revised agenda, please?
Of course.
I'm sorry, thank you.
May I get a motion to approve the revised agenda?
I will second that.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Yeah, moving on to the approval of the August 8th minutes.
Did everybody have a chance to look over them? Okay, just making sure. Oh, I guess I'm the only one that sent it and left.
Steve was here.
Right.
You want it back?
Oh, 2 weeks.
No, this wasn't August.
Oh.
This is from August.
Steve, did you get a chance to review the August 8th minutes? Did I get a motion to approve? The August 8th minutes.
I will second this.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Next, we have a public comment not on the agenda. Lord, do you have any
No.
visitors here outside?
We do not.
Visitors online? Okay. And we will move quickly on to housekeeping items.
Okay, I'm gonna try here. The state historical fund obviously was submitted before the deadline, so, and I did get a confirmation of that. I think I included in your packet the final version that went in after Steve and I panicked and Scott was all, everything's fine. And we did get our updates in because they asked us, can't even remember what it was, but it panicked me because it was like, we will not accept your application unless we have this. But we got that together. Oh, urgent info missing from application. And then I think the Climax Grant Award is also in this packet. And then the
Hey,
CLG
Lori,
webinar.
This is Stuart. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, yes, Stuart?
Lori, you are the only person I think whole group. I don't know if the
No,
microphones aren't on or it could be repositioned,
Okay.
but I can't hear anyone else.
it is.
Yeah, I
Thank
can hear
you.
you Lori very clearly, but and Joey just a little bit, and everyone else is essentially out.
Yes, please. What am why can't I don't want to
One
share.
second, guys.
Let me share. Stop sharing. But we need to fix.
Is it a microphone issue or a screen sharing issue?
No,
Microphone
it's
issue.
microphone. I think
Microphone,
that one needs to
Yeah,
be,
it's using her microphone
it
instead
needs
of
to use
the
the
other.
owl.
All right, that should be better.
Can you hear us now, guys?
can Steve and Mick talk?
Okay, well, one thing I learned last weekend is that the State Historic Fund grant should be reviewed and we should know whether we got it or not around December 15th.
Oh.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
You guys hear
Thank
me?
you.
Yeah, it's better. Not great, but better.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, are we ready to move on to updates?
Yes.
Update A would be Chief Boyle.
Okay, and I'll present this issue first and then, thanks to, Steve Boyle for being here to, provide some additional information from the fire department, so I'd like to, talk to the commission about, demolition of unsafe structures, which is, in the new code that we just passed this past summer. There's a section for, exemptions from the COA for unsafe structures. The language in that new code section, it's, if you want to follow along with me, I'm on page 40 of your packet, 40 of the PDF. I don't think the actual page numbers are labeled on the PDF, but so the code language is the same in under the moratorium. It's essentially the same on the moratorium that it is under our new code. And that moratorium is expiring, I think it's November 14th. And so I want to make sure that we are comfortable with the language that is in the code. Or if we're not comfortable, consider additional revisions to the code regarding exemptions for COAs for unsafe structures. So again, I'm on page 40 of your packet. So I'm going to talk about two structures that I provided like an administrative approval for demolition this past summer under the language of the moratorium. But I think it's really important to note that language is the same in our code. So even after the moratorium expires, if there's an issue, we're still left with that issue. That's why I'm bringing it up now. It's not just the moratorium that we're worried about. All right, so the first structure was a shed at 209 West 8th Street. So this applicant basically came to the city saying that we have a shed that we're worried about falling down in our backyard and falling on top of our kids play in the backyard, we're concerned about it. So staff provided the language regarding demolition of historic structures to the applicant, both for what a COA would require, but also since they're applying under the moratorium, letting them know that there was a moratorium in place. This property owner is an architect, and so they were, asking for more information. They said they have a civil engineer friend who could evaluate this structure. So ultimately, they provided a letter from a structural engineer, and that language from that letter is included in your packet, that essentially saying that the structure meets the definition of a dangerous structure per, and they quoted the section of the current building code, and stating that the shed posed a life safety risk to the public. They included stress test calculations within their report. So I'm sorry, I wrote this memo like a week ago, so I'm gonna have to remember a couple of these key points here as I read through this. So essentially, when I looked at the demolition moratorium, I found that it did meet the exemption section of the moratorium for unsafe buildings. And what language says that the governing authority with jurisdiction must issue an emergency order or a correction notice. So that is the language. So when we're, I guess, evaluating this, we need to think about what is a governing authority and what is a correction notice, or what is a emergency enforcement action. It's worth noting that in our code, not under the moratorium language or under the exemption, but in our code for application of for a COA for demolition, that, this is on page 41 of your packet, under section procedures for issuing a COA for demolition of historic structures, I've highlighted in your packet. I'm sorry, that's the wrong code section. 1 second. I'm trying, okay, no, that was the right section. It was one more sentence down. The applicant must submit a report prepared by an architect, appraiser, engineer, or other qualified person experienced in the rehabilitation, renovation, and restoration of historic structures. And then it goes on to address several bullet points, one of them being like structural soundness of the building. So when I authorized the demolition of that shed, I was really looking at that code section where the applicant had provided a letter from a structural engineer. But that really wasn't the way to do it, because that was if they were applying for a COA. The link, so that's very specific. So it's a very specific submittal requirement for the COA. For the exemption, we have a very general language, just says a governing authority with jurisdiction has to implement an order. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that one. I'll move on to the other example. The other example is 211 East 6th Street. So this is definitely more of a considerable structure. I don't know all the history on this building, but this applicant provided a letter from the fire department, and they also sought the exemption under the moratorium. The fire department's letter definitely, discussed the structure being hazardous and not being habitable. And there was, I went back and forth with the fire department just on clarifying, how the fire department was approaching this from an enforcement standpoint. The fire department did clarify that they were considering their letter to be an emergency enforcement action. And so that, from my perspective, checked the box in terms of it was an emergency enforcement action from a governing authority with jurisdiction. All right. So that, so I did issue administrative authorization for demolition of that structure based on the fact that they had provided that letter. In your packet, I've quoted the applicable text here. So again, this is it's really coming from 3 places. One, we have the moratorium, which is going to the moratorium text, which is going to expire here on November 14th. But that's the same language that is in our code for the exemption. And then I've also quoted the submittal requirements if someone is applying for a COA. So, and I'll let Steve Boyle speak here in a minute, just about a little more about our meeting with the fire department. But the questions that I would like to have answered tonight from the HPC would be, this language in our code that we just revised is very general in terms of these exemptions for a COA for unsafe buildings. And can that, I guess the question is, because it is general and therefore somewhat subjective, can that language be misinterpreted, misused? And should we have more specific language so that we are very certain of the outcome of someone using that exemption? One of the last times that we met, we came up with some talking points to discuss with the fire department. And Steve and I met, And those kind of talking points and questions are included in your packet. And the fire department has provided answers kind of on their policies and procedures. I have also met with the Lake County Building Department to discuss how the building code would address an emergency enforcement action or a correction notice for an unsafe building. I think the long story short, from the building department's perspective, that the building code, the IBC, is very the language is very general. It's it basically gives the chief building official a lot of flexibility in terms of how to issue what we call an emergency enforcement action or a correction notice for an unsafe building. So I'll let Steve perhaps speak to some of the, I guess, the considerations from the fire department's perspective. Steve and I talked about how the fire department was willing to put a time limit on any order that they issued. That the fire department would prefer to keep that to more just issues that were related to where a fire had actually occurred, and let the building department be more responsible for the evaluation of structural soundness. So I'll turn it over to Steve here maybe next, but any questions for me so far on that? I can go into more detail, but I just want to provide the high level summary of why I'm bringing this issue in front of you.
Just to clarify, before we talk to Chief Boyle, you two, I guess, are suggesting that he would be responsible for a structure that was damaged in a fire, but any other decisions along that emergency line would come from the building department?
Yes, and Schneider, the director for the building department, she would like to come to one of our next meetings to make sure there's a very clear understanding between staff, city staff, county staff, and the Historic Preservation Commission, if we were to receive any more requests for exemptions for unsafe buildings.
Absolutely.
Scott or Stuart, did you have any questions for Chapin at this point?
Nothing from me.
Nothing from me either.
Thank you.
Steve, I've included some of the like preliminary, like your responses to the HPC's questions, but do you want to perhaps just talk to the HPC a little bit about how you envision this going forward?
Yeah, yes, when Chapin and I had met, there was a
Steve,
productive
I'm sorry, our microphone is right here, we've got some Zoom numbers. Do you want me to maybe just come to the front row?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine, that's fine. Can everybody hear me okay from here?
Scott, can you hear Steve?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. When Chapin and I had met, we had ended up with more questions than answers for what to do, but the biggest thing was to reiterate or just make it clear for the fire department, I don't want to get any more letters out there for buildings that want to get demolished because they want to clear the land for whatever else. I wanted to stay within my zone or our zone in the fire department. Flood, electrical, it's Leadville, so I don't know what else could be there other than those three with fire. So if the building is determined to be unstable, I need to get the building department involved. So that would be an engineer and if it's something that's common sense, like there's just a wall left, we have to take it down. That would be the only thing, because there's nothing left. But if it's fully gutted and the roof is about to collapse, it was a bad build, an old build, or a type of a build where there's no longer any structural stability. And we would have to start doing coordinated efforts of getting it down. The shack, that you were talking about earlier, I wouldn't be concerned about that. That's not a fire department issue whatsoever. The second one, that could teeter-totter, which it is, it's leaning, that it could be leaning over into the other building that's next to it. And that would be somewhat where we have to gather everybody together and make a decision on that. If it's historical, does he have to break it down and rebuild it? Or just take it down because it is going into the sidewalk and the building next to it? So those kind of things we probably have to do a little more looking into, but in the end, we want to stay within our zone. I don't want to be throwing out demos left and right.
And we talked about how, right now the language in the city's code says that there has to be an order that's coming from the building department or fire department to the property owner saying, you need to tear this building down because it is unsafe. And so, so that is the situation right now that the code is designed for. It is, it's not written so, well, if you don't wanna go for a COA, then like, this is how you work your way around the COA and apply for some kind of exemption, right?
And
And
that's
that's
what feels
Yeah.
like is happening.
We're not designed for that as a fire department. And definition was another big thing, a clear definition across building department, historical preservation, and fire department, what it deems hazardous, immediate, what would be other terms you guys have for
Well, I mean, again,
unlivable, it's.
in our, the language in our, the word in our code is, let's see, is determined to be dangerous to life, health, or property in
So-
accordance with building and or life and safety codes.
And that's an easy fix, it's just a clear definition across the board for all the different entities. So it's all, everybody's in agreement, it is this, it's not this, but it is definitely dangerous to the public and the public way.
And
Was Steve and I, oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead, go ahead.
what Steve and I talked about, and this is on page 42 of your packet, so I'm just kind of making sure I've covered all the bullet points here. Steve and I talked about, if we were to do a code revision to make this more clear, specifying that, governing authorities with jurisdiction are fire department and building department. I wouldn't necessarily want to leave it to that. I probably want to maybe say, not limited to, but including or something like that, because there may be like a state agency, for example, that comes in and says, there's environmental contamination, this building must be, something like that.
And an asbestos feature would
Yeah.
be a state.
Right.
Just wanted to clarify with Chief Boyle exactly what I said earlier. So if it wasn't something that was specific to the fire department, water damage or fire damage, or it had been a drug lab, and so it was a dangerous
Drug lab,
environment.
yeah.
Those are all things that would be actionable specifically by you. But if it was a structural concern, it could then be bumped back up to a second review. At least the building department official,
Well, and again, this is,
because every building in Leadville leans. I mean,
Yeah.
that building has been leaning for 130 years. And it was taken down from the top down. It wasn't dangerous. It was just old. It wasn't a hazard to the neighboring properties. That's why I pushed so hard on that one, to take the onus off of you to get a second opinion from somebody,
That should be the process.
especially when it's a National Historic District building.
Therein lies to me, the proper way is it shouldn't be a second opinion because Steve shouldn't be brought in on something that isn't fire damage, wind damage, flood
My
damage,
point,
all of
right.
that.
This was-
Yeah,
So
if
that
it's actionable by you,
person
that
is
seems
on-
pretty straightforward and clear.
At some point defining whose role is what, maybe in the definitions of, because to me, the fire department is only held responsible for specific types. So if you're saying, just coming to Steve saying it's unsafe,
Right.
maybe
Yeah,
it's the
you're-
building department immediately, if there has not been a fire in the past,
Exactly.
or,
Well, and you don't
That's
wanna,
what I'm saying.
you don't want that liability. Why would you?
right.
Not.
And that's
If
what
you
I'm
needed to
saying.
if you needed to tie a ribbon across the front of it and say, this building is unsafe, for
That
this
I agree.
reason, right,
That I
that
agree.
makes sense. But somebody coming to you and asking you in lieu of a structural engineer for a building listed in the National Historic District seems like bad process for us.
And is the wording such that we're forcing people to either pick a building, person or Steve to inspect there or say, I feel like somehow in the definition or somewhere, we need to make sure that the fire department is only responsible in specific things. Otherwise, and it's like what he said right
This-
there in that thing.
This building was the first one, and that got me thinking of the process, and I worked with Chapin, and we met, and it's like, we gotta do something a little bit more in writing. And then absolutely, yes, it has to be a structural engineer that comes in at their dime, if they do the demolition, it's their dime, it all goes on to the owner, the historical council should have, anything, they assist, that's your prerogative, yes.
Sure.
But, talking with Chapin, yeah, I'll stay within my realm, and we have a plethora of resources with, Chapin, building department, to your regulations, that we can come together to say, this is what you need to do. This is what fire department's not gonna do.
Is it right?
Well,
This is
and we
where it
do
falls,
have a
but
full-time
the-
building inspector again, which we didn't have for a while, so those kinds of things can be done almost next day now. At least from an initial review standpoint, with the county building department.
which
Yeah.
would cover anything in the city as well.
Right, and the county will, Ann's gonna come and talk about that, so I think what we need to do today is we need to decide. Is based on, you know, Steve's responses, which are all, we're putting your memo and everything he's communicating here. Does, you know, just from the perspective of the fire department. Or things that are related to what would fall within the fire department's realm. Does there, and we can ask the same question to the county about the building department, but does there need to be a code amendment? To be more specific about what is required to meet that exemption?
That in definitions for sure, strongly. I asked the question earlier, and I said, what does it mean when it's this? And it has to be clear, or concise across through all three entities. Would you like me here at that next meeting? To probably be helping out with Ann and I going back and forth, because we're close to work with each other on such a.
Of course.
Yeah, and that'd be great, because I mean, you know, Steve, because we're going back to, this is something that has come, it's not something that someone is applying for. They're not, hey, can you please order me to do something, right? That's not what this code section is saying. This is saying that, you know, the government is going out and saying, okay, you need to tear down this building. And so from that from that perspective, is that the way we want to continue doing this? Or, you know, because what's happening right now is people are applying, you know, they're essentially applying for the exemption. The government, the building department and the fire department are not going out and saying, hey, you need to tear these
Well,
down.
it's a sneaky way to get around the demolition ordinance is what it is. And they found a way to use people who are not familiar with the process to do it. So you end up in a sticky situation on accident.
Would it
Um,
help if just to modify definitions or maybe add some existing definitions with that? Or would we have to actually change code part?
Well, I mean, I think part of that is what we're asking the that's what part of the question to the HPC is tonight, but I mean, yes, that could be part of it, but I think you're not gonna be able to just address definitions without addressing the code. I mean,
Right.
the key language is governing authority with jurisdiction in issuing emergency enforcement action or a correction notice. So, you know, some of the examples that, like, I mean, we're touching on in this memo, in these bullet points, you know, we're talking about how the fire department has IFC section 111, which essentially provides definitions for, or you know, references definitions for what is an unsafe building according to fire code, which makes Steve's life a heck of a lot easier. And then there's a similar section in the building code regarding unsafe structures. So, you know, one of the options for a code amendment would be, you know, for a structure that is meeting, you know, the criteria of, you know, the fire code or the building code or other jurisdiction, but you could get a little bit more specific in terms of fire and building, other than just a governing authority with jurisdiction. So that's the first part of that. The second part of that is an order, essentially, you know, an enforcement action or an order. Steve has talked, and this is in your bullet points, but Steve has, you know, agreed to, you know, going forward, that would be, you know, the fire department would consider more like a form for that. We don't have one right now, you have to draft it.
Yeah, we're getting into the point up here in Leadville with all development and new populace coming into the town, and we have to start legally covering all of our bases. If we were taking somebody's building down, we'd have to legally have all the documentation in place if we had to. My question for the commission is, what is I'm trying to word this in the right way, but what is the concern? Because I don't think we're getting too many demos, but we're trying to cut it off before it gets out of hand. And we don't want to see any of our historic buildings coming down because someone wants to use the loophole for demolishing buildings.
In short, yes. So we recently expanded the purview of the Historic Preservation Commission from just the retail corridor to the entire National Historic Overlay District, which runs 3 or 4 blocks on either side.
So that includes houses.
It does.
Oh.
It includes all buildings inside the National Historic Overlay now.
Okay. Is it residential outside only, or is it outside and inside?
No, it's just outside. If it was to be, basically gutted, but the exterior was to remain, that's all that HPC is interested in,
Okay.
the exterior.
Yeah, we don't have
We
any,
have
nothing on the interior.
Right, but outbuildings, garages, sheds, main structures, and commercial, so that it does cover everything.
And the intent is not to hinder development. The intent is to try to preserve buildings that have historical interest. That particular building was one of the last clapboard, two-story clapboard commercial buildings left on Sixth Street in the middle of a National Historic District, which was why it raised a little bit of an uproar that it didn't get any kind of review. You guys didn't do anything wrong. We just want to make sure that next time somebody else knows about it and it's not just on YouTube.
That's why I'm here.
Right, right.
And
And the
because
same
we-
thing for you.
yeah.
That shouldn't be your, you should have the ability at any time to run that flag up. And at least get it seen by council.
They
Well,
were definitely-
yeah, in this situation, though, there was clarification between the fire department and myself. And
Understood.
say, is this, you are a governing authority with jurisdiction, is this emergency enforcement action? The answer is yes. So therefore, and, we didn't have a lot, we haven't had meetings, weeks and weeks of discussion on this, so that was all we had.
Well, and it was the first one that you guys had ever done, so there's
Yeah.
nobody's saying that it was done wrong. We just want to make sure that next time. And
Oh.
I hope I'm speaking for the commission, that somebody speak up if I'm not,
Yeah,
is that next time you guys have the ability, when it's a questionable. It's an important structure, it's an obvious structure, it doesn't seem to me, it wasn't in a recent fire, and it's not. It's not something that you could immediately condemn. You need to have the ability to run it by at least a building official, if not HBC and city council. Before that order is.
And
put
if
in
we're
place.
shaping in a building department, we wanna have the legal documents in row and check.
Absolutely,
And then.
because
good
to your
go.
point, we lose enough buildings, it affects our national historic status.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely important for the city to address this.
And it's the loophole. It's because we just changed and people are feeling like we're just really cutting into what they can do.
Cause you have people that are coming in that could stand to make a couple $100,000 with their vision, not knowing what Leadville is about.
Absolutely.
And
Exactly.
they just need to know, and it's like,
Right.
understand this, cause you just said a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know. And that is
Sure.
great information,
Right,
and I think
But
they
most
need to
people
know,
don't.
but they're, those
Right.
stickers, those people from the city, they come up
Mhm.
here and throw stuff, but. I think they would understand better, and then they might actually change their mind and go.
Right. And that's kind of what we want, is a chance to explain to them, for them not to be able to just come in, scrap it down to a vacant lot
Jim
again.
and I are in
and they don't
agreement,
know.
let's give them
So,
something that they can go through
Exactly,
legally, and they know what they need to do,
So
just
put
like with the
things in
permitting
place.
process and all that.
absolutely,
This will help them out tremendously.
absolutely.
so Chapin, I guess we'll need your expertise to tell us how best to address three things, I believe. The first one is that the fire marshal, the fire department has to have the right under certain points.
what is the governing authority? That's the,
Right, and at what point can you act, and at what point does it need to involve a second authority? I think a second authority should be required in any instance that's not immediate damage. I mean, literally like a fire took it down and it's gonna fall over if they don't take it down right now. So, which authority? Secondly, at what point does it require a second opinion? And third, if there isn't an emergency order done, it needs to have a time limit to it.
Yeah.
You can't order, I think, if I remember right, this order was issued in January and they took it down in November. So that needs to be
We were
avoided.
talking about that, with, access to resources, to take it down, the asbestos study, the asbestos mitigation, that demo. We would have to kind of shoot around on that, to figure out what is best and expedient. timeline.
And that makes sense, but if the building is structurally sound enough to go through all of those things, then it's probably not an immediate demolition need.
Or does it need to be broken down, rebuilt?
and that's
Just-
really the crux of this,
Right.
because that is what the COA process for demolition is for.
Right,
Right, so that's where, and I, looking at the bullet points that I included in the memo in your packet for discussion, and Joey mentioned that, the other part of this is the demolition permit. So yes, we need, what is the governing authority? We need a form, we need redundant review, a time limit, and then the consideration for a demolition permit, which the building department, has not yet implemented yet.
and to be perfectly honest, if it's not an immediately actionable item on your part, in other words, if you can't walk up to it and say, well, this needs to be taken down or it's gonna hurt somebody right now, then it ought to automatically go to a demolition permit. I
Yeah,
don't know that we need to do all 4 steps. If it's not immediately actionable, it should automatically trigger
Go
a
through the
demolition
COA
permit and go
process.
through the process.
Well, we were discussing that too, that's great,
Right.
that we're on the right track with our meeting, is that I could just check off, nothing needed with the fire department.
No
I did the
immediate
same thing with the solar
concern.
And that
arrays.
should automatically kick it to a
There we go.
demolition permit,
Yeah.
if we could figure out how to do that.
Everybody in the bureaucratic process knows that it's not needed with the fire department.
Right,
Okay, that's good, they can go through the process.
Sure.
which should be a design on that demolition permit. It's fire department.
Well, it limits
Not, you know,
their
and then it
liability
goes to
drastically,
the-
which is the
Because
important
if
part.
it's not had any damage from these catastrophes, then it doesn't concern the fire department. It goes immediately to the building department. And if they can't say something quickly, then it just goes through the COA process.
As we get to the end result of the whole process, the next thing with authority having jurisdiction, it would be the fire department, like we do with new construction and remodels and things of that sort.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's gonna be some things they have to put in place. I only mention it because it is a big frustration of trying to get these contractors stop digging all these big holes and then put a fence around it. And we'll pay for, I don't care if it's like a ski area or whatever. There's something like that. And that's where we come in and it's like,
Well,
make
and
sure the
that's,
dusting, there's no dust, you clean it up, and I know they're gonna clean it up, but when they do phases of demo, you're cleaning it up.
Right,
And then anything, the utilities,
right,
we
right.
don't know what's buried in Leadville because we're all inheriting something from the 1800s, so we don't know what's under there. Just things of that sort, as at the end result.
well, and triggering the demo permit would automatically bring in the building process, so that addresses a lot of those concerns as well.
Yeah, I definitely think the demolition permit is an important part of this. I mean, this exemption is the exemption from a COA. But a demolition permit can essentially, and the county issues, you know, that they have the capacity to issue over the counter building permits for things. And so someone could obtain a fire department sign off on a demolition permit to make sure that things like, gas line shutoffs and all those things are addressed. But I do think the demolition permit part of this is, if we're going to revise the code, that would be an important consideration. Okay, so we talked about, 5 potential ways to additionally clarify what this means. I think the only thing we haven't talked about is, maybe we haven't really clarified is the order, or the correction notice. So how this has been functioning is people have been approaching the city saying, I would like to, to tear this down, so, like applying, they're not doing a COA, but they're essentially applying. And then they're coming in with this documentation from the fire department, from the civil engineer or something. So is there anything about that language that the HBC wants to revise to make this more of an application like process? You see what I'm saying here? Because otherwise they're just simply requesting an order. They're requesting an enforcement action. So that's kind of like saying, hey, I would like for you to tell me that I have to tear my house down in 30 days.
Well, the current wording seems to be important for the fire department and building department in the case that there is a danger of a dangerous structure and the owner is resisting tearing it down. But, what we're finding is that now people are finding that they can get around the new code changes by using that.
Right.
So there still needs to be the possibility of enforcement when it's necessary. Maybe the first thing you look at is who's requesting this? Is it the fire department or the building department, or is it the owner? And if it's the owner, then that sends it in a certain direction.
Well, if it's the owner, then I essentially have to say, I don't have an order from the building department or from the fire department, and that's what I say, which means that then they're
Then
gonna
it's
think,
on the
oh, let
owner
me go
to
see if
show
I
that.
can go get an order from the building department or the fire department.
So we need to change the code. So that if an order is placed, there's reviews built in there. I'm not sure how to explain beyond that. I think you know what I'm trying to say, but what's the strongest way, or what's the most expedient way, if nothing else, to get a second opinion?
Well, I just think if it's any kind of review, then then there's not a timing really issue, and that's the whole purpose of the COA process.
Then maybe, is there a way to then eliminate this outside of immediately actionable condition to automatically trigger a COA? If somebody comes to you with an order, but the order gets kicked up to the building department because it's not actionable specifically by the fire department, could that then trigger a COA?
Yeah, but a COA requires public notice and public hearing, and it has to be approved by city council, and that can be a 5-week process.
I'm not seeing that as
But the
being a problem,
emergency, yeah,
I mean, he would know
Yeah, we're talking about
immediately if there's something we needed to
exemptions
take down.
I mean,
I
you know,
think, maybe I'm overthinking that, and please tell me if I am, but the whole point is to trigger the review.
yes, yeah, I mean, what we were talking about is structures that are truly dangerous.
Right.
Where there is an imminent threat to life safety.
There was a fire in this 2-story building, and the
Yeah.
second story is literally about to collapse, nobody can go into the building.
Yeah, And-
That makes perfect sense, and that's obvious,
that's an order
it can be
coming
proven
from-
by
yeah.
photographs.
yeah.
It's not an opinion that was taken from the street. In this case, because the building was leaning, that two completely different things. Or the building was a meth lab, and nobody can go inside of it because it's dangerous chemicals. You don't argue that.
But
There's
see,
no-
to me,
case-
all of
there's no
that
point
comes
there.
from the fire department, this
Right.
isn't the owner, I really think Steve's point of who's requesting this has more value than, you know what I mean, because if Steve tells us or the owner, you have got to take this building down, and, whatever happened, it's wind caused it, now it's leaning over here, then we know, it's not the owner requesting it, and we know it's not some loophole thing that has to go through the proper channels of, he says it is, and then we signs off on a demolition permit and it's done, and it doesn't need to come through us, because the COAs come through us. The exceptions, I'm starting to feel like shouldn't be allowed to come from the owner. It seems like it should come from the building department saying,
But
or.
it's the owner who initiated it, but the order came from the fire.
I get that, but it's also the owner requesting the order, and that doesn't seem like that's
So
something.
to free that up, it's in the code for third-party inspection. Again, it's on the owner's responsibility. They don't like a shed in the backyard and thinks it's dangerous, and they have every right, it's their own castle.
Right.
That, well, if you want to demolish this, you have to prove to the city, prove to the county, through a third-party inspection, an engineer, an independent engineer comes in and gives a report. And then it's agreed upon by the city or the building department. Fire department's still not with that. But that would definitely be through all the different agencies that need to sign off on it.
Yeah,
And that is part of the application process for a COA.
Right.
So I guess my question would be, are we clarifying in the code that when that order is issued, in order to have that order issued, that they have a submittal requirement?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Question, sir, how many demolition permits have you issued in the past 2 years?
I'll take one.
Okay.
But I'm not too worried, so,
Okay.
if you get.
that's why he's asking, that's why.
That was a big fire, or a big flood, or it was a big, not flood.
Yeah, it is literally a runaround on procedure, is what we're trying to address. What's the simplest way to do this? You're the expert.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we should make sure that we hear from every commissioner before we leave this topic, but. In your packet, the memo has these bullet points on these different things that we could address, so I could come back. If we're all in agreement that the code should be more clear, I can come back. With a code, I guess a suggested code amendment language, some red lines that addresses each one of those bullet points. And for your review, and if there is any reasonable having like a secondary option, I can propose 2 options. But that would be the next step, if we're all in agreement that yes, we should clarify what a governing authority is. That yes, that the order should be in, clarify what that format of that order is in. That there should be a time limit, included, in that. And that they must obtain a demolition permit, which means that the county has to implement a demolition permit. So I would revise the language to be more specific and include all of those points.
I think that would close that loophole nicely and limit liability on both of your parts.
Okay,
Scott, thoughts?
I think that sounds good.
Guys?
Stuart?
I think we definitely need to do something and fast, because this has never been a problem. But now two things have happened in the last couple of months, and so.
And there are so few, there literally aren't 6 left, like this building, and they're in much worse shape. Down off Second Street, so, yeah, it sets a dangerous precedent. Stuart, anything to weigh in on there?
No, I've been doing my best to track the whole thing, and it sounds like you guys have identified the key points.
Anything more? Then yes, please, let's proceed with. I know you're crazy busy, but if we could come up with some very simple. I know, this is the last thing I want to ask anybody to do, but I think we need to.
yeah, so two more steps, so I will have, the chief building official, for Lake County come to a future meeting, next meeting, I can get her here to talk about the, so you know, if, Chief Boyle is looking at this just from things that have been damaged by a calamity or a disaster, that, you know, the building department is looking at this, addressing everything else regarding, you know, structural safety. So that we can make sure that we have a good understanding there. And then we can decide at that time, and maybe by that time I can come back with some draft language. But I would also basically need your, I guess, recommendation, your direction to approach city council about working with the city attorney to I guess, draft an ordinance. But I'll need to come back with a revised red lines before we do that. So we'll do building department presentation, meet with building department and red lines, and then get your direction to have me go to city council.
Yes, please.
Okay. I think that concludes that matter. Thank you for your feedback. Thanks to people.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, updates on B, grant options in the brownfields workshop.
Did you guys make it to the Brownfields? No, I didn't, I really, Jacob didn't. So we can discuss that at this meeting if we find out anybody who has information on that. I think Laurie, our city administrator, might went for a while.
I've seen a presentation at planning conferences about or from those groups. And they're basically saying that, hey, we are a contact, we have all the resources. If you have a contaminated site, or it doesn't have to be contaminated, but a site that is not a clean greenfield site, and you want to find funding opportunities, and you want for both design and mitigation, those sort of things, start with us. We're a good place to start, and we can help you.
And then I didn't know if we had any updates on any grants that we're working on or anything like that. Scott or Steve?
I think we should hold off on the application to the El Pomar Foundation until we know for sure about the state historic fund.
Okay.
Because it'll strengthen our application if we know we've got the money, and if we don't get the money from the state historic fund, then it's kind of a wasted effort.
Yeah, you might be right.
So we should know, as I said earlier, we should know by December 15th. And since El Pomar doesn't have any specific deadlines, we can just turn around and apply for the money right after that.
Yeah, I think that's good. Since we've got most of the language already set for El Pomar, we would just do minor tweaks and then put together whatever paperwork we need. So it should be pretty quick. And also I'll be back by just late December, so that'll be nice too.
I could use a bit of a reprieve myself, so that'd be good. And we finally received that National Trust check. They told us we got the money, and then I hadn't received the check, and I got it last week before I left, so. We've gotten all the grant money, obviously the other from CLG grant will be an invoice type reimbursement type situation, but everything else has been put in our account. And good to go.
Very good. Going on to new and continued business, added something to the agenda, email that Stuart sent out to the commission. Stuart, would you like to review that? Would you like me to review points? Would you go over some of your key points for us?
I'd be happy to. I just had a few thoughts based on our last meeting. Basically things that are related to, how can the HPC become more visible? And we talked about a few ideas, and then I just started thinking about it and jotted down a couple others that I bounced off Joey to see if he thought I was in line with things. We had talked at the last meeting about hosting a workshop to help people understand how to apply for tax credits. And I think there was pretty general support for that. But then I was also thinking, and I think it might even be more popular, would be a public workshop, maybe a couple times a year, where we helped people come in and taught them how to do the research to understand the history of their own house. I know if something like that had been offered, would have been very interested in it. And in fact, I still would be, because I don't really understand it. A couple other things were consider a seminar to assist businesses in applying for historic preservation grants. That happens a lot, and I think it's a difficult process, as we all know. And then one of the thoughts I had, and this is just based on something I saw when I was traveling a month or so ago, was, well, let me back up here a minute. Another thought was to try to work with the newspaper and some social media components and come up with something like a "Did you know" column or a "Did you know" ad that we run in the paper every week or every month. And it's sponsored by the HPC, and we're prominently listed there with our logo and our name. And it would be just a little historic fun fact about town. For example, the one I thought of was, did you know the bell at the St. George's Church, which is still working, was donated by Horace Tabor in 18 whatever year that was. And I'm sure there's lots of interesting tidbits and facts. We could come up with that for a year long every week if we wanted to. And I think it'd be fun to see that in the paper. I think it would get our name and our logo out, and it would get people thinking more about historic preservation and what that history means for our built environment. Am I doing okay on time here, Joey?
Yeah, we'll need to be pretty succinct, but we're okay right now.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yes, as long as we can move forward quickly.
Okay, well, one of the last thoughts I had, and this was based on a trip I took, was if we could get several buildings around town, or all the buildings, the historic ones on Harrison, to work with us to develop posters. They don't have to be huge, but posters that could fit in their front windows. It could include a picture of the building historically, and then maybe list some interesting facts about the building, who the architect was, what the architectural style of the building is, when it was built, what its uses were in the past, just some quick bullet items. And then maybe a fun fact about, some outlaw got shot in there in 1910 after he robbed a bank, just some tidbit of interest, and work with the building owners to put those up in the front windows.
We did something similar to that during the pandemic. It was just historic Harrison Avenue photographs, but they went up in vacant windows up and down the street, which we had a few of at the time. And it was a very popular thing. So there is a place to start with that.
And I could leave it at that tonight.
Okay, I'd like to review some of those things later on, but those are excellent ideas. Questions from anyone?
Well, we have the banners that already show historic structures.
Right.
So we could make sure that those get put up again sometime soon. And they don't actually have our logo on it, but that does make people aware of the history of Harrison Avenue.
It does, absolutely. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Sure, thank you.
Yes,
To
please.
continue the discussion. Thank you, Stuart.
All right, 2023 awards.
honestly, I don't know if we're ready for that. I'm sure that we were supposed to be, but then we did miss the meeting the last time. I had a list.
We had put together a very
Yes.
short list and it was only about 6 properties.
Right, maybe 4 to 6, something like that, and I just don't have it in front of me right now, but you guys, at one of your previous meetings did, the last meeting in September, you listed several. I will say that Kurt, sent me a picture, of a house that has done some renovation, 130 West Sixth, and said possible candidate for an award. Probably no COA, which I could not find, and to Chapin and I, that meant no award. Sorry, at some point, we're gonna have to not tell people good job if they didn't do it the proper way. I guess it's a weird way of saying that, without
Nope, that
any
makes
impact
sense.
at all. So not to shoot someone down who is trying to preserve, but here's a picture if you guys wanna look at it, and to my knowledge, I don't even know if they would have needed the COA, because I don't know what all was done. So while I don't wanna be rude about,
No, sure.
but, that's just something. So, maybe I'll have a really solid list, and we can vote on the list at the next meeting. But you guys did, nominate several, so I do have that list upstairs.
That's just,
And next on the list is discussing grant applications and the survey on the website.
I honestly am not sure what you guys are wanting me to do with the website as far as what to put on that page for the survey. Whether or not, somebody said something about putting grant information on there, which I didn't know if you meant the whole application that we had submitted or the award letters to show what we had received. I'm just unclear of what you wanted, and do you want a progress report or something as we go along? I think I got lost on the last meeting. We discussed, you guys wanted me to put something on the website,
I think,
a survey
well, I
page.
think the survey thing was to put basically put the survey that
Put the
we're giving
questionnaire.
to the people in the neighborhood online so that they have the option
the
of
option,
filling it
yeah.
out that way, or printing it out and
And I can
filling
do
it
that.
out, and didn't have to actually have it handed to them.
Right.
No, it would also drive into the website. Steve and Scott specifically, what are your thoughts on putting grant information on our site? Would it be worthwhile? I don't know that a grant application makes any sense, but the grant award letters, just showing that we're generating funds and using those funds for the benefit of Leadville. What are your thoughts, you two?
I'm not sure if we would need like award letters, but we could certainly mention in, a section where we have our survey information, that it was funded by X, Y, and Z, which would probably please the funders and also, show that we are able to get this outside support for our activities.
So just a synopsis of the grants that were awarded to allow us to do the survey?
We could do, I mean, if we want to get a little more content, we could put every one of the grants we apply for requires some sort of title and an abstract or a really brief description of what the grant is going to be used for. So that stuff already exists. It would just be a matter of cutting and pasting into a website.
Okay.
So that could happen. And I don't know, Scott, what do you think about listing the actual amount of the grant that we get?
Yep, we could, or like a ballpark figure. I'm not sure what the sort of etiquette for
I
that
don't know
sort.
that there's a benefit to listing the amount as much as just the public knowing that we were able to receive grants, and that's what allowed us to move forward with the survey. I don't
Yeah,
know.
the idea of putting the title and abstract so that then people have an idea of what the money was used for and why we got it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe,
And maybe we should, I don't know, that would be.
well, we could try it without, but another thing I was thinking of was maybe the date that the grant was given
Okay.
to us.
Does
Yeah,
that
the
show
name of the
several
grant, the
different-
date of the grant, the synopsis of what the grant
Yeah,
is and was used for,
yeah,
something super, super simple.
Okay.
Maybe just a sentence or two.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Another public meeting.
I think I'm getting cloudy, even worse than I was when I came in. Should we close the meeting or leave it open until the end of the open house?
Okay, they're on the agenda.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I
I'm
think
just not sure what we should do. We could actually adjourn and have the open house, but we could keep the.
I think just in terms of like, open meetings law and everything, I think that we should keep it open.
Absolutely. That would be
So we
good.
can just say that we are
Okay.
moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is the open house.
Nice job.
Okay.
I do want to remind everyone that we have there's a city council work session this evening at 6, so we do need to be out here like
All right.
10 till.
It is about 2 minutes after 5 o'clock and we will move on to the public meeting portion of the October 24th HPC meeting. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Oh, the open house portion.
The,
Open house portion. I don't know what I said, but that's what I meant.
Oh, it's a public meeting,
So
so.
sorry, open house
Well, see,
portion.
I kept calling it
Okay.
an open house / public meeting, but then I forget what public meeting means
I'm
to us.
just
It's like
reading the
reading
agenda.
script, Joey. Okay, so this is the part of the open house. Yeah, I'll just put the cookies back on the table. And, how do you wanna run this? Either do you want to address?
Yeah, so I'll just,
And then we can figure out how.
for everyone who's just joining us, so, Historic Preservation Commission meets at, 4 o'clock. And so they started their formal meeting, so, we basically blocked out the last hour of the meeting for the open house for the historic survey project. So we're now just closed our formal business, and we're getting the open house portion, so I can just briefly introduce this project in the open house, kind of explaining everybody's roles in the room. So just to just thank you for being here. So everyone sitting in the dais, this is the Historic Preservation Commission. And then Lori and I are staff members for the city of Leadville. I'm the planning director and Lori is the administrative assistant and permit technician. And we have 2 advisory members here also for the Historic Preservation Commission. So those are non-voting members that assist the Historic Preservation Commission. We have Elise, what's your last name again? Hoganson, thank you, with Metcalf Archaeology, who's our consultant. We've received grant funding to pay for the consultant work to do the survey project. And we also have Hazel, she's a high school intern doing an internship at the city level, who will be assisting with this project also. So I'll perhaps just do a brief introduction and then maybe turn it over to Metcalf to explain any details, and then we can just kind of, we'd like for this to be informal, so we'll just open it up to questions and we can just start talking. But basically, the purpose of this survey is this is a priority for the city to survey these areas of 8th and 9th Street. Years ago, we did a survey for all of our historic buildings along Harrison Avenue. So we have cultural resource surveys for Harrison Avenue, so we have more detailed information, but we don't have a lot of information about the history of individual buildings for the rest of our historic district. So we have plans that have identified 8th and 9th Street as the next priority for the city to survey. The intent of these surveys would be to understand what is the importance of these individual buildings, to understand if they're contributing or non-contributing to our historic district, or our National Register Historic District. And this will be a multi-year process, so this is the first step from where we are right now. Would be the survey of 8th and 9th Street, and then we would be conducting other surveys as well in coming years, with the ultimate goal of having surveys for all of our buildings in our historic district. And we're doing most of this is being funded with grant funding that the city of Leadville is receiving. So the importance of this survey in future years, we would be able to right now in our historic district, for any kind of modification to historic structure, building or site, we use, except for Harrison Avenue, we use the Secretary of Interior standards. So those are from the National Park Service. So those are the same standards that apply across the country. So they're not necessarily custom to Leadville. And that can be both a good and bad thing. So ultimately, what these surveys would allow us to do is long-term, it would allow us to come up with design guidelines and standards that are custom to the city of Leadville, so that we're not applying standards that are applied broadly across the nation. We can have standards that are really a good fit for Leadville. So I'll maybe pause there and open up for questions, or let Louise add anything she'd like to add.
Hi, guys. As I said, I'm Louise Robinson, and I have archaeology, and I'll be here this week doing the survey. Today I was out on West 9th and yesterday as well. I'll move on to West 8 tomorrow in the next few days, so you see me out in my high vis vest, that's so me. And we really appreciate you coming out, because any input that you have on your own properties will really aid us in preparing that report to better understand the history of your homes, of the houses of this survey.
Any burning questions from those who joined us? Okay.
What kind of questions would you ask us, or will you cover that?
Well,
Questionnaire up here.
we have a questionnaire that if you'd like to take home or pass out to anybody you know, but basically this questionnaire is asking for like, how many outbuildings does your property have? When was it constructed? Is it, a primary building? Is it an accessory building? Do you have documents that confirm the date of construction, or is this kind of more estimated? Do you know who the architect or the builder was of the home? Do you know who the previous owners are? Some of these things like ownership we can get from more recent years from the Lake County tax assessor. But when you get back into the early 1900s, that information is more difficult to obtain. Are you aware of any modifications to the structure over the years, historically or recently, or is the structure as it was built in the 1800s or early 1900s? Do you have any pictures other than what we can obtain from the street that you'd like to share with the city? And then just any other perhaps unique or interesting information. Well, the goal of this is a cultural resource survey for property, and you can certainly explain this probably better than I could, but it would be, it's a standard template that is on basically a state of Colorado form, and that form usually has a picture of a building, and then it kind of explains kind of the information that we're asking questions about. So it talks about when the building was constructed, if there was a notable architect, how the property transferred ownership over time, if there were any additions or modifications to the structure, where it's located on the site, all of these things that kind of helps develop an inventory of what our historic structures are and how those structures contribute.
It's not in my hair at all, but I really,
They muted. I don't think they can hear us too.
David, is the survey interested in interior modifications at all, or is just exterior? And so it was in trouble surveys, or we're only interested in the exterior, but it does include the main property, the main house, and any outbuildings. Wanting to know, which ones are historic, which ones aren't, because in a lot of cases, the outbuilding may have been the first structure on the parcel.
And what's the definition of historic? It's like 50 years ago from today?
Yes, 50 years.
We have the city of Leadville, I think that's the purposes of this, for the survey, right? We also have our own definition within that you need to Leadville for what a historic structure is.
So-
in our city code.
No.
Okay, I was just gonna say, right now, because we were designated in 1961, we have what's called a period of significance, which originally ran from
1870.
I
I think we stated 1860.
We did, but the original one was like 1880 to 1900. It was a very short period. And even places like City Hall were not considered historic because of our period of significance. So there's a couple of things the survey will also help us figure out is we changed our period of significance here locally. And with this survey, it will help us figure out whether we are able to change it on a national level. It also will help us with our boundaries. The boundaries of our NHL district are very strange. I mean, very choppy. And another reason for this survey is to explore some of those areas just outside of the NHL and see if on the national level, our National Historic District needs to be expanded or the boundaries shaped a little differently. So it's not an easy answer of what is considered historic, because right now I feel like we have two different numbers, two different dates, because we want to expand that period of significance to include 1860 to 1970.
I think we did 100 years, 1860 to 1960.
Okay,
It might have been 1870 to 1970. We'll have to go back. and
I
look at
know,
the notes.
I thought
But the reason for that was because there was a building boom just after World War II here in Leadville, and we wanted the option to be able to include some of those buildings as well, not just the original Victorian style buildings built during the silver boom.
and as time goes on, those become more historic because the time that passes 50 years is kind of capped, so.
And going back to reiterate a question that you had, it's only about the outside of the buildings. But if somebody gets a survey, and I know there are several houses in that area that still have their original stained glass that was commissioned when the house was built, or they still have their original pocket doors, which are a pretty defining feature. If they mention that information, can it be recorded with that house? Is it a bad thing to include any interior details? Especially when they're original to the original construction?
And from my perspective, it's all just a matter of what information is available to me, what I can find, and it's a lot of surveys aren't like this one where maybe there's not a public house or a property owner component to it, so
Sure.
I'm not always, able to figure out what the interior is like. So if you have any information that you'd like to share on the interior, I'd be happy to record that, and it'll only support our document.
Do you have any pictures that would help us identify dates, unless they can listen? Because the only one I can find is basically the one that's over as well. It shows the King House under construction, which kind of dates a lot of houses right in that area. But I was wondering, I've always been looking for other pictures and I haven't been able to find it.
Right. Well, like you kind of mentioned at the beginning, that this is kind of the first steps of this whole survey process for the West End in particular. So I know that some work has been done to find historic photographs. I haven't seen them just yet, but I'm going to be doing my own research while I'm here in town. And so my intention is to include any of those historic photos that I'm able to find in our final report.
Yeah, no, I mean, can we take a look at those to help us?
A lot of them haven't been found yet. I mean, they're gonna be in different places like, the library, CMC's library of historic pictures. And so far, and we've asked anyone in those areas, we sent out the mailer, if they have any photographs to share with us, and we just haven't really received any yet or uncovered any yet.
Once those are, you're asking, once those are all compiled by city and the consultant, there's an opportunity for the public to peruse those photos, see if there's anything that might be interesting for you. Yeah, I mean.
And I think we would.
Yeah, I don't see.
Yeah.
we would
Once
essentially
you
have
get
a-
them.
We're just starting this process.
Right, don't have them yet.
Yes, just starting this.
Don't have them yet.
Ultimately, we would have a lot of pictures and hopefully, and so then, that's all. Public.
That'd be great, you might run across a family photo or something that it's never been published and.
Yeah, and that'd be something that to, clarify that if anyone was providing photos to help this project, that those photos would then become public record.
Right.
So there are several books about Leadville architecture that are out of print that are available to go and look at photographs. Janice Fox at Temple Israel is an excellent local historian. The library still does have some Leadville history as well. And then we have the Sanborn maps upstairs that are available for you to check out at any time as well. So we can certainly help with other resources to try to find a specific house or a specific neighborhood from some pretty unusual sources.
As you're doing this survey and talking to homeowners, are you looking for written documentation or just people's understanding of their best recollection?
I would say having a record would be ideal, but the oral history component is still very valuable, so word of mouth from the property owner is still very useful to me. Okay. I'm not knocking on the doors as I'm taking photos and recording each house, so, really, if you have any tidbits, please include it in the questionnaire, and I've got my email address is included on a questionnaire that's sent to me. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the sections of the cultural resource surveys that say conversations with, longtime local, Bob the builder. Said, his cousin, Bill the baker, moved the structure here in the 1970s or something, and that appears to be accurate. And so, using whatever information you can, but also presenting in a way that understands this is obtained from an oral history, hasn't been verified in any kind of official document. But it provides, whatever information is available. Sometimes it's just that, it's just from a conversation from someone's recollection.
The ferry house, by the way, is no more.
The which house?
The ferry house, they painted it,
Oh.
and it's been that way for so long.
Wasn't painted that way.
No.
Yeah. What other questions can we answer about the survey that is just getting started? Anything from anyone? If we have information about other adjacent houses, I just got a bunch of documents on a house on West Sixth, so it's a couple of streets off, but really good documentation. Does that do you any good at all, or do we need to wait until we're doing a survey on that other area?
I would say, yeah, probably wait, that technically is not within my scope of work, so it would be, additional, and that would require
Gotcha.
another conversation.
So
but-
just 8th and 9th right now, in East 8th and 9th, right?
Right.
Sorry, West 8th and 9th right now.
Yeah.
Could I get some more houses? Familiar with?
Yeah, actually, if there's any extras, I'd love to take some with me.
Okay, sure, and I can certainly print more.
Okay,
Yeah.
This was mailed, correct?
Yes.
There was a mailing.
It was mailed.
Did
Yeah.
Greg have the opportunity to do the little news
I didn't know
thing, talk
that.
about?
Figures to now.
And if you want to just mingle, we can do that. There's some cookies back here. If you want to talk with the HPC commissioners, or if you have any specific questions, we'd like to try to answer those.
Lori,
Sure.
Greg, the mayor had talked about doing a newsletter
Mhm.
about the survey. Do we know if that has happened?
I don't think it's happened, because I probably would have had to have done it. And
Right.
I was-
And you've been
I was I've been gone, and I was trying to get these questionnaires out, and
The mailing was done, there's not incorporated into a second newsletter from the mayor.
right, correct. The mailing was done. And yeah, but not the part where the mayor was gonna send out.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of on the code updates as well as the survey that's taking place this year is what the newsletter was gonna be about. And I do not think that's happened, no.
What state agreed with that?
Yes, Dana joined our meeting. And Mr. McDonough, I wrote their names down, but everybody else they need to sign.
Anyone on Zoom have any questions about the historic survey?
Mr. McDonough, do you have any questions or anything? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I joined in late, but I think I've got the gist of the conversation. No, at this point, I don't.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for joining us. Dana, did you have any questions?
No, thank you. I just came here to learn.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
So when you're walking through the neighborhood and you're looking at the houses from the front, what's your focus?
well, while I'm in the field, I'm specifically looking at the things that are hard for me to see later in my photos. So foundation, window pane pattern, siding material, roofing materials and any decorative elements. Those are what I'm really focused on in the field. And that's what I've got my tablet, so I'm jotting those notes. And then when I get back, I'm gonna fill out the rest of the form, which includes a lot more in depth. They wanna know the floor plan, the building type and style. They wanna know any information that we have on the builder, and then providing like a full description, just to paint the picture of the house and the parcel and the outbuilding. So that's a separate form, an ancillary form. But yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, so it's not just defining features, it's actually foundation type when you can tell, and that area has some pretty interesting foundations and quite a few different ones, so.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
I know the answer to this, but I don't think the people in the audience do. Are you going to go onto people's property?
only if I get permission. So if anybody wants to let me on, I'd be happy to do that, but I'm only taking photos from the public right away.
Would that include alleys or just the main street?
I did notice the alleys, and so I'm not a local, so I'm not sure if that's public street. I know it's not named. I did walk down one, so sorry if that was.
The alleys are right of ways.
Okay,
Alleys are totally right of ways.
Okay, because that group, that was giving me a really good, view of the back of outbuildings, sheds on the back of a lot of the properties. And it's so hard to see, you know, from the front of the house, all the details, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
And once again, just to reiterate for the audience, your purview is only the exterior of the house. It has nothing to do with the interior of anyone's house. If
Right.
somebody wanted to share features that they thought were important on the house, they could, but we're not asking questions about that really.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's not part of my eligibility determination for the National Register. And that's another component to the survey form, is I'm gonna make a determination, or excuse me, a recommendation for Colorado's State Historic Preservation Office for them to decide whether they believe that the house is eligible for the National Register or not.
And the same thing goes once again for the audience. The HPC's purview is on the exterior of the houses as well. The interior of the house has nothing to do with anything that the HPC would do or our purview.
Yeah, with the exception of any kind of addition or like expansion where the floor area was increasing. And in that case, even 99+% of the time, that was also gonna mean a change to the exterior.
Right.
But if there was an increase in floor area that involved a change to the exterior, then technically, so that some people might consider that just an interior modification, but might be bumping out the house and.
You're changing the
clarify
footprint.
that's exterior.
Right, the footprint.
Right.
Does Metcalf, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about how the results of the survey will impact future permitting requests?
Yeah, I could talk about that. I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but I'm going to go into more detail. So, you know, cities, you know, across the country with historic districts, typically they'll have cultural resource surveys that say, okay, this is why these buildings are contributing or not contributing to the historic district. And they will have design guidelines that say, okay, if someone is doing something to their property, if they're adding an expansion to that, to like an addition to the back of the house. This is the character of the cultural resource surveys define the character, and then the guidelines say how you keep that development in character. So right now, we do not have custom design guidelines for our residential areas. We only have design guidelines for Harrison Avenue. We don't have custom design guidelines. Our code just makes a very quick reference to the Secretary of Interior standards apply across the entire country. And I mentioned before that can be like a good or bad thing. So that might be a bad thing in terms of how the national standards, you know, in some places might be more geared towards, you know, when we're talking about window preservation or siding preservation, the language in Secretary of Interior standards might be, you know, not applying to the situations like we have in Leadville with small structures, you know, with gable roofs and siding. It might be more in that particular standard, might be more geared to like a commercial building in downtown DC, for example. And so there are a lot of benefits to having design standards that are localized and unique to our residential character areas. So it might say, okay, if someone's coming in and they're building an addition onto the back of a historic home, that addition should not overpower the single family residence to be 3 stories. It should have probably gable roof or shed roofs. It probably should have this type of siding. So there's these basic things that keep it in character with the neighborhood. So basically says it shouldn't be, a big shiny translucent black box or something. But in order to have a solid foundation for what our design guidelines are, we have to first understand what are our existing historic structures, what is our character, and that's what this project does. So these cultural resource survey will inform what future design guidelines for the city of Leadville will say. Yes.
So, would the city or would you, the commission, have the authority to tell somebody what they can or cannot do with the house?
So the existing code already requires a certificate of appropriateness for an exterior modification to a house, an existing house. Whether that was changing out the siding or the roofing, or it was adding an expansion. So we have 2 processes for that. One is considered an insubstantial certificate of appropriateness. So that would be something more along the lines of, you're doing maintenance to your home, you're replacing the roofing, you're replacing the siding, you're replacing the windows. The substantial category would be something like you're proposing to demolish a historic structure, or you're proposing to add an addition to a historic structure. And those types of applications would come in front of the Historic Preservation Commission for a public hearing, and the Historic Preservation Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council. So for big projects, there is a public hearing process. For smaller projects, that is processed basically through city staff. Yeah.
I thought that was just for contributing buildings. Did that change recently to non-contributing designated buildings?
There would be, I think it's safe to say there would be more flexibility for non-contributing buildings. But if you are within the historic district and you are proposing a modification, then it does require a certificate of appropriateness, but the review process is much simpler for a non-historic structure.
And part of the problem is we don't always know whether it's a non-contributing or contributing. That's why we need the survey so bad.
Yes.
Or to determine.
Previously, it was only designated buildings that were designated on the National Historic, which there's what, about 15 or 30 of them in the city.
59.
I thought those only or those reviews were only required on those buildings. And now you're saying they're required on all buildings that in the historic district? Yeah, because I didn't realize that.
Before
Yeah,
code change, that's true, actually.
And so this changed, there were 2 recent changes. I think one was 2017, I think was a change to if you were doing a new infill residential, so if you have a vacant lot.
Right.
All right, and then the more recent change was this year, the city council passed an ordinance that said that if you're making an exterior modification to any structure within the historic district, then it requires a certificate of appropriateness. But now, again, that doesn't mean that it has to go through a public hearing process if it's a smaller project.
How far down does the historic district go on 8?
To Maple Street.
Maple.
Not on 8, but it's James.
I was gonna say one of them's James and one of them's
Oh,
Maple
sorry,
without like that.
On 9th, goes to
Sorry.
Maple, on 8th.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you for that.
And, yeah, and nothing with this project is proposed to change the boundary, it just
Right.
informs
Just information.
if that boundary is appropriate in future years, but we're not there yet.
So this might be out of scope a little bit, but it has to do with historic. I'm at Maple and 8, right in the border, and my house was built in the 50s and completely gutted in the 80s, and there's nothing historic about it. So I know up here, there's color requirements
is that like exterior paint color requirements that are being proposed? Is that gonna be pushed way that far out of town? The color requirement?
I mean, the regulations will be the same within the historic district. So there's a standard for new infill residential to comply with the color requirements. And I think there's at least 1,000 different color options. I have to look into the code for the exact code language for just like repainting if there's a specific color requirement that's codified. But
If I'm not mistaken, it's actually highly suggested and not actually required.
That's correct.
And in the code, the wording is not required, it's strongly suggested or something like that.
for an existing house.
For existing houses, true. If you want to paint your house.
Part of that, again, is because we have Secretary of Interior standards that apply for other than Harrison Avenue, that apply for our residential neighborhoods for the existing homes. I mean, we just have the standards from the National Park Service. So, that don't specify specific colors for Leadville or anything. So part of this project would be coming up with basically a survey for what our historic buildings are, what is the character, and whether or not that addresses color. And then I believe that's up to Metcalf. And then at a future time, we could decide, do we want to have design standards that are custom for Leadville? And then at that time, we could decide, should color regulations be a part of that for exterior modifications? But all that would go through like more future public meetings. We're not there yet.
So to clarify your question, there aren't any color standards now. There are no color requirements now. We make suggestions that you'd want to stick with the historic color palette. Once again, thousands of colors, but nowhere in Leadville, to my knowledge, except for maybe new infill, it is color required. Only suggested to try to keep it in keeping with the neighborhood.
Okay, I just think something like there were 18 available and they were like all these really weird bright colors.
There are 18
Yeah, what?
Leadville historic colors. And they're a suggestion and they're on display at the hardware store here in town, but they're not required colors.
And there's all the variations of them, if you look further into the thing, you can get different hues of the same color, that's how there end up being thousands, is because you can take them off those basic colors.
So yeah, for many years now, there's been a Leadville color palette that is available to anybody to use if they choose to, but it's certainly not required. And sir, questions?
I'm gonna ask, pulling the thread on the conversation. Once the design standards are set, are we gonna be required to move those, like, get into those standards with our existing homes? Or are those optional, or how is that?
It would only be, so once those standards are adopted, so anything up to that point would be considered legal non-conforming. You know, unless it was like a building code issue or something like that, but if it's related to historic preservation design guidelines and standards, anything up to that point would be legal non-conforming. Past that point, once those standards are adopted, then anything that if any modification that you're applying for would be reviewed for compliance with the standards, but the houses would not be required to come into conformance with the standards.
Everything would be grandfathered in, basically, and up to that point.
And nothing we're doing can cost the homeowner any money, if that makes sense. You wouldn't be required to change a single thing. It's just moving forward. It might be easier for us to make recommendations to keep modifications or new windows in keeping with the neighborhood or in keeping with the style of your house. But certainly no expense and no requirements.
But we're a long way away from that. I mean, we would have to have lots of money in the budget, hire consultants, draft design standards. We're not there yet.
We're just trying to maintain the character at this point without losing too many historic buildings.
Yeah, no, excellent questions, guys. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
very good question. Very good question.
What are the clarifying questions? Anybody have any other ideas? Anybody on Zoom have any thoughts?
Well,
If I could, I mean,
Go ahead, sir.
one question, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the meeting, maybe this was discussed, but the survey that's being done will be done from the street, as I've heard, external and accessing the alley and at that end of it. what about actually then interviewing the owner or previous owners to get additional information that, for example, in my case, I own the former Parkville and Leadville Water Company buildings on West 9th. And there's quite a bit of information that probably could be conveyed that doesn't quite fit on that one-page form.
Would you answer that question for us, please?
If you'd like, I can, get your contact information and we can schedule something. I'll be here until next Monday, so I can come and meet with you and take this down, or you're welcome to just email me a blank email. It's still included on the questionnaire form. You don't have to conform to this. If you have additional information or photographs, whatever, I would love to hear all the resources that you have, so.
Sure, I think that my contact information is on the questionnaire on the response. This is for 315 West 9th. But what I'm alluding to is that I purchased the property about 4 years ago, and before that it was in the ownership of Parkville Water. And Greg Cheater is, of course, the manager of Parkville. He's been worked for Parkville for, I think, almost 50 years or so. So the history and the photographs and all that on that building would be in the files what he thought of Parkville. Although the buildings, the most historic building, the pump house, was actually constructed while it was Leadville Water, not Parkville. But for myself, I'm leaving tomorrow for Turkey for a 3-week vacation, so I'm not really going to be able to be accessible until about mid-November or so. But I'd be happy when I get back to certainly sit down, talk, do whatever I can to help out. I'm very interested in the history of Leadville and the history of the property.
Absolutely, and I can give my phone number to Lori, and that can be distributed, and I can take calls and jot down any other information you have. The report won't be ready by November, so absolutely that time frame works with me. I'll still be collecting information then.
So, an excellent question, Mr. McDonough. How long, so the survey only goes through next week?
Right, physically, yeah.
But you're willing to take information until when?
Until spring.
Yes, spring.
Okay,
They will
so
be
for
working
several
on
months, we can
research.
take additional information.
Yes, and they'll be doing research, this week, the survey, they're physically here in town. After they go back and compile all their information, they're also gonna be doing more research in different things, in different areas where they can get photos and other information, and going through the questionnaires that are mailed in and emailed in. So it's gonna take a lot longer, and we have until spring, actually, before we are expecting any complete results and information. So it's gonna be, the survey will take quite a while, just not the physical in-town part of it.
Gotcha.
So if someone, let's just say there's a home where someone hasn't responded to the survey, and, you're standing in front of the home and there's a sidewalk that goes up to the front door. Would you knocking on the door in the middle of the day to say, hey, would you like to talk to me about this property? Or if someone hasn't responded to the survey, is that it? Are you going door to door, or just taking photos from the site?
Just taking photos as part of the reconnaissance.
Okay.
That's why if you know of anyone who is interested in sharing something with Metcalf or the city, they need to reach out to us, because we will not be going door to door asking people for information. We're gonna leave them to the privacy, and that's why we mailed the questionnaires and the information about this public meeting, mainly because we need you to contact us, because it's not something that we're gonna go out and do. Some people just don't like that, so it's not something that they normally do. So you guys need to, if you have neighbors that would like to tell us anything, you need to contact the email address on the questionnaire, or my email address, Lori, administrative assistant at Leadville. So I'm definitely on the website.
I'm just thinking about potential constraints, like when you're out, surveying and trying to take pictures and things. Leadville has, a pretty unique built environment, all things considered. It's very tight. So we have small structures, very narrow lots. Our historic lot size is 25 feet wide. A lot of these structures are just a few feet apart. So even from an angle, it's hard to see the back of the building from the sidewalk. Additions is definitely part of the historic
And I guess the historic progress of, where you started with, a little, hole in the front, and then it was added on several times over the years. Some of those things may be difficult to capture in a photo from the street because buildings are so tight and close together, and then you have other site features like sidewalks or stacks of firewood or a bus or something that's parked in the yard. And so there's a lot of that kind of funkiness that is going to be, pretty common out there. That, just I'm anticipating it might be a constraint for actually, if you're not, having someone walk around their property inside their fence or something like that, might actually be a constraint for getting a little more information other than the front facade. Maybe back and just, halfway back in the building. Maybe some of that can be seen from the alleyway, but there might be a lot of constraints out there, just given the very tight built environment, and I'm just gonna call it like the funky site features,
Two questions.
I have one comment for the Metcalf representative. This is Stuart Friend.
1 second, Stuart.
Go ahead, Stuart. You go first.
That's okay. You go ahead. Stuart, I'll get you next. Go ahead.
Stuart, I'll go first. All right, 2 questions. First is, how useful are you finding public information on our properties? And is that going to be included in your report?
Well, I'm taking the photos before I do a lot of the research, but we have pulled a lot from tax assessor on chain of title and estimated building dates, and there's on a lot of them, there's a floor plan, which a lot, and he mentions subdivision, whatever is recorded. So it is somewhat useful, but certainly the photographs in person and whatever I can find at the library or from word of mouth from you guys will help a lot. So my kind of approach to this, and kind of jumping off of what Chapin just brought up, of there can be instructions. I don't have a certain expectation of finding everything about each property. I'm trying to find what I can within the scope of work. So,
Also, we did have county courthouse fire in the 40s.
1888.
And everything says 1888 at the assessors, so that's not very accurate. So that's kind of a hindrance in trying to find some real dates. That's why I personally, when I'm researching property for a COA or something, use Sanborn maps and go really far back. And even the ones online, we do have one upstairs, but they go up to 1937 from 1883. So it's very helpful to see what was on that lot as you're trying to go through it. So county assessors and public records aren't as helpful as we wish because of the fire. I'm sorry, you had a second question?
Yeah, I do. I reserve that. Second question. So will we have access to the information you talked about our property once it's completed, and when will that be?
Absolutely, yes, that is part of as a matter of fact, in some of our grant surveys, what we had budgeted for was pre-survey information getting out to you guys who live in that particular area, and translating it. And then also after the survey is finished, getting that information out to those people in that same survey area. So yes, you will.
And Stuart, you had a comment.
Just, I wanted to let the Metcalf representative know that our home is 316 West 8th. It's part of your survey process, and we'd like to give you formal approval to access our property. If you need to go down the driveway to get pictures, you want to go in the backyard to photograph the outbuildings, we welcome you to do that, and we're looking forward to your project.
okay, thank you. I'll write that down.
This is the only picture I'm familiar with. It's, I believe it's dated 1884. That predates the 1888.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Is it the Guggenheim Photoshop, I think? It has, pictures to the side of your house.
Oh, yes, I do.
What's that review that?
Colorado on glass has a lot in pictures from my I don't think that's where that came from.
That's the only picture, it's blown up, it's just a teeny little corner of the picture. But the king house is what, and then here's.
Yeah, I know.
He doesn't know, he says, no, we're sure that's.
Oh, okay.
I guess. Oh, my God. But, Colorado history. Oh, my goodness.
I'll give it, I'll find it.
There's another.
Of West Nine, that predates 1888. So it shows the King House. We don't have an exact date on that picture, so maybe you'll find something there. I just put it there with a question mark. It's
That'll be up here when we got to our meeting.
and the trees. Big tall pine trees sitting there.
I'll just say, one final comment for me as staff is that just, in summary, obviously, the purpose of the questionnaire that we have, that we've mailed out, and, the intent of, Metcalf survey is to, obtain information, voluntary information, we can get from the public, and that Metcalf can get from the right of way, documentation, pictures and things. The Metcalf email address is on here, so, please, anyone that you speak with about this project, just let them know. And then this will be available this is available on the city's website, but, that email address is where information can be sent to. That's being provided.
And I can add that if you want to expand upon anything that, you don't want to spend the time to write out paragraphs on the form, you can email that address and we can set something up for the phone call.
What else should we cover, Chip?
Everything else there.
Yeah, great.
Does anybody have questions? City council does have a work session this evening at 6 o'clock. So we'll probably need to get out of here in the next 5-10 minutes or so. But there are cookies and brownies down here at the table. And any other questions? I'm not trying to run anybody out, I don't want you not to get cookies because you're talking too long,
Thank you guys very much for coming.
Really
Thank you for your time.
If you know of anyone who just wants to walk into City Hall and speak with someone first to get more information. So Lori and I are, staff members of City Hall who are here at 5 every day. Our offices are upstairs. My office is the last door on the right. So if you or anyone that you know just wants to come talk to someone about something, about this project, our doors are open at City Hall and we can get people in touch with Metcalf if they need.
Or give us a call, we have on the website, our phone numbers on the website there.
Any other questions, you guys?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
And please spread the word to your neighbors too.
Yes, absolutely. All right, you guys, can I get a?
Yeah.
Could I get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn. I second.
At 5:48.
Okay, Zoom guys, we're adjourned, just because you can't hear us, everybody started talking. Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Good job.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Scott.